Welcome to the place of rest, where our aim is to give you language that helps you displace the growing confusion, chaos, and dis-ease of our times. My name is Jonathan Boyce, and it's my pleasure to bring to you today's episode. Virginia and Carole Holliday continue their discussion on grief, identity, and the wonder and awe that can be found on the path to healing. We hope you enjoy today's conversation.
Okay, thank you for taking us through your book. I think we got through the first few chapters in the last segment. Where did we leave off?
Well, I think that there's three sort of segments to the book. The first one is, and this was explained to me in a writing seminar. For those of you who want to write a book someday, if it's inspirational, I prefer to say, is the first couple of chapters you have to have the reader believe that you've experienced pain. So that's what I wrote about. What caused the pain? What caused this chaos and discomfort in my life? And maybe somebody can identify with that. Maybe your grief isn't exactly like mine, but the ravages of grief play out the same. So the first part of it is just kind of like, yeah, this is what I went through. And the second part is, well, I sat down and made a list about how did I get out of this? And this is what I came up with. And toward the end of that, I talk about thin spaces, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, where you come out of this and you start recognizing that there is a wonder and an awe to how God is working in life. And I often tell this to people. I say, sometimes you just need to have God show you something in the smallest of ways. And that happened to me when I was at the doctor and I had to have some blood tests for STD. And it was like, okay, well, how did this happen? How did I end up here? And I was crying when I got out of the elevator and I came and sat down on a concrete bench outside the medical office, and a complete stranger, I never looked up and saw this person. It was a woman. I don't even know what ethnicity she was. I don't know if it was an old hand or a young hand that took mine. And I say, I don't know if she had Chanel shoes on or if she had work boots on. I have no idea. This person sat down next to me, took my hand, and sat there silently for what seemed like an hour. I'm sure it was maybe, 30 seconds, maybe a minute or something. And that was one of the holiest moments of my life. Wow. I believe, was a thin space moment where God collapses the distance between heaven and earth and allows us to get a glimpse of what the afterlife is like when people are communing with each other without spoken words, by simply a touch. And that taught me that there was a way for others to lessen the burden, which is the whole point of the book. The book is not a memoir. It's not for people to know about, like, who am I? I'm just a girl getting through life, right? It's not for people to know my story. It's for them to know enough of my story to believe I've experienced the pain that they may be feeling, and how to resolve it, how to kind of organize that chaos that Virginia speaks so well of in her R.E.S.T program. It's that process. It's the pain, it's the process, but then it's the coming out of it. It's the emergence of you as a redeemed individual. It's that begins with the wonder and awe of God. And how is the wonder in God? I just wrote a devotion on this about how is the kingdom of heaven displayed on earth? It is done through the saints. It's done through the touch, in my case, the literal touch of one person upon another. I have no idea what this woman's faith was like. I don't know if she had faith or religion. It's not that. It's that God used this person as an instrument in my life. So therefore, I must be able to be that person as well. And that's where so much of the food element comes in. Virginia and I have enjoyed a lot of great food together.
Oh, yes.
It was like, okay, meet me at this bakery. Because, there's nothing off limits, because there's something wonderful about sharing the table with someone else. And I don't know
wait, can I just interject this?
Yes.
Do you remember the time we shared the table and we had like $100 bill?
Yeah, and at least it was more. We
and
ate
left
for hours. That started my life of crime. That started my life of crime. But Virginia made good on it.
Bill and didn't realize it till the next day.
It was so embarrassing.
I didn't realize we didn't pay.
I was so embarrassing, but they didn't come after us. So I guess, I don't know how we got out of that. Maybe we should try that again, Virginia. I mean, maybe they just thought these two couldn't possibly, I don't know. I cried so hard that night at the table. They probably were afraid to approach it.
Do you know, it took me, I didn't go back for like 2.5 months.
What did they say when you went back? Did they remember you?
They looked at each other like, is she kidding? They couldn't believe I went back to pay a bill that, I don't know, I don't remember if it was 2 or 3 months or it was just months. And they just looked at each other and they couldn't believe it. They couldn't
Oh
believe I
my
was there.
gosh.
And they said, no, please. And I said, oh, no, 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 please take my money.
Oh my
And we're
gosh.
so
Yeah,
embarrassed. We're mortified. And I told them it just made for a great story, but
yeah,
I'll
it
never
did.
forget. We walked out without paying the bill and didn't realize it for a day.
Yeah, we were
That's
very happily walking out. We weren't even furtively like darting to our cars or anything like that. We went under the full cover of the lights in the parking lot because we closed the joint. But there is something. So part of emergence, I think, and wonder and awe, crazy as this means, in my life has been food. So I call it food,
yes.
faith, and other distractions because I realize that when I cook for other people, it gets my mind off my problems, right? And there's grief will do a lot of things to you. One of the things it will isolate for sure, and it thrives in isolation, right? Like a petri dish thriving in the darkness, growing all kinds of ugly things. So it gets you out of isolation and it encourages you to have a feeling of worthiness or worthwhileness because we all need that purpose-filled life, right? To quote a famous book. But sitting around the table, and if you don't like to cook, that's fine too. I mean, it's not a book about you have to cook to get through grief. It was just for me, it was a lovely distraction. And when I brought people to the table, I was able to say, oh, I can do something for them, which made me feel very, very needed. You know, it's funny. I tell the story of Nancy, this enigma that was in my life, who was this very well educated. I think she had an advanced degree in English literature or something. And she had this curly head of strawberry blonde hair, very bright, very articulate. And she was also homeless. So it was this crazy enigma, but she also had cats. And I thought, oh, how do you ask this without being rude? But I was dying to know. I said, you know, how do and I approach this? And she knew what I was asking. She goes, why do I have cats when I can't take care of myself? Because, and this is the key answer, the cat needs me. It wasn't she needed it. The cat needs me. And when I was able to feed people that were hungry, they liked that. They needed that at that moment. And it made me feel redeemed, or the situation to be redeemed. So wonder and awe, appreciating and asking for God to show you thin spaces. He's never left me standing empty-handed. Whenever I said, God, can I have a thin space moment? Can you show me something crazy happens? Or someone calls me out of the blue, or I get an encouraging text when my faith feels shaky. Those things have happened. So wonder and awe through the thin spaces, and healthy distractions like food where I can feel needed makes a huge difference. And that's why food, and that's why that cooking school that was on that little street, Los Rios Street in San Juan Capistrano, California. That's what we decided, that our table was going to be where we fed the soul, because then the stomach would happily follow. I'm not even sure the food was that good. I mean, I think it was.
The food was amazing.
But we had a lot of fun. We had a lot of laughs. And a lot of women in particular brought other women who were in grief.
Yeah.
You were one of them, Virginia, going through a very tough situation medically with Jordan. But they sat there, and somehow we could lift their spirits. And as a crew, as a team, we decided that that was truly our purpose and our manifesto. That was what we were serving people for.
How did flushing this out and putting ink to it,
yeah,
how did it ultimately serve as a healing agent for you? Because Carole, when I say you were on your deathbed, I just, to look at you now is unbelievable, because you were in bad shape.
Well, yeah, I mean,
so
the thing
much
is,
grief, so much
yeah,
pain.
it was just, you know, if you've ever been in a season where there was a lot compiled at once, and I'll take an intro before I answer that, because I'm going to use it answering your words, Virginia. I want to tell you, when I was editing this book, there were a lot of unfortunate things that happened in my life during the time. It's not worth going into, but it was a time where there was a multiplicity of losses and disappointments in my life, and a lot of pain medically. it was a time of grieving for me again. And I thought, I was editing the book and I thought, do I believe this anymore? It was a real challenge to me. And the good news is that I did, that I came through this almost secondary season of grieving. And I thought, I don't feel the way I did the first time around. The first time around, I felt so worthless, so shameful. And through the work that I had done, both in my safe harbors, all the professional work that I had done, this friends with stretchers like you, Virginia, who would steal food with me from a Thai restaurant and talk to me late into the night. Friends with stretchers, healthy distractions, new perspectives, a real understanding of scripture and what Jesus said about my value as a woman and as his child. When I explored all of that, I thought it worked. I went through the second season of grieving where I had a chance to reread my words and question, did I really believe it? And I realized that I did. I had no doubt about my identity, even though the grief was not as intense, but nevertheless, 5 or 6 things that happened during that period of time and are still sort of trailing off through my life that made a difference. But I got to put my glasses on for one thing, because I want to read your words. You said that there is a direct correlation between disease or dis-ease and the narrative behind the disease, and the stories we tell ourselves about us embed themselves like a seed. So this is Virginia's words. This is how you can take the chaos of your life, because you ultimately, through all of the steps, through all of the pruning, through all of the self-examination, which is what I did throughout my life before I wrote the book. The book wasn't the self-examination. I did the work and then I wrote the book. Now, some people might do it the other way around. People said, was it, freeing for you to write the book? I had already examined myself. I had already done the pruning. That is what organizes the chaos in your life so that you can rewrite the narrative. You can't rewrite a new story until that confusion is settled. And that's the work
right.
that you do.
That's right.
You're taking the different components, the will, the conscience, the feelings, the emotions, all of that stuff, and you're putting them all in their proper order, right? You're taking all of the disparate pieces that are skewed on the table, and you're lining up the edge pieces, and you're getting the borders, and you're figuring out what the middle pieces are. You're putting it back together through all of these different things, through friends with stretchers, through proper healthy distractions, through your faith and examining that, through all of those things that I write about in my chapters. You're doing that and you're organizing the chaos. Out of that comes the new story.
And to interject a thought, while we do that here, I have data to substantiate
Interesting.
and track the progress. Biometric, acoustic mirroring systems, and a number of other data-driven processes. So that's why I say the concept of the law,
the brain,
when you come into alignment with what's been lawfully put in place to sustain and advance your life, when you can see in black and white the science, psychoneuroimmunological science behind that, it is an unbelievable, it's not years and years of therapy. How about that?
Right.
It doesn't have to be years of
right, but work. It's also multifaceted.
Yes.
You can't just work on, I'm just going to read my Bible, right? And I'm going to isolate myself. I'm not going to talk with other people. I'm not going to take a walk and see God's beauty. I'm going to isolate myself and stay in this room and study my Bible. It's not one thing. It's a multiplicity of things. I mean, and isolation is at the root of it all, right? Because when we feel ashamed of our circumstances, even when we have no reason to feel shame, that's Satan's greatest tool, I think, is making us feel shame. Because what does that tell us? We're not worthy and we're the cause of so much of this when things are done to us.
Yeah, which, by the way, I want to intersect at this point. You make a lot of references to God and faith, and now you bring into these parasitical spiritual parasites. Yeah. And you said, Satan or the spiritual realm. We don't just talk about those things. I like to substantiate everything we talk about. So the podcast 157 and 158, if you haven't listened to it and you're listening to this one, please go back and listen to that. 40-year psychotherapist gets into great detail about those voices.
Right.
And
Unbelievable.
his study in mental health. He let his clinical license expire so he can begin to teach about this and address this without restraint.
It's a crazy thing how the worlds collide. The supernatural, we don't see it, right? It's all hidden behind some kind of curtain that God talks about, that we're not allowed to see that dimension. Someday we will. But I had an experience, and I'm not particularly one who's had, actually, until I went through this deep heartache, I didn't really have any moments where I'd go, oh my gosh, God spoke to me. Or I wasn't one of those that heard God tell me, go right, don't go left at the fork. I wasn't one of those people. Did I believe that people could have those experiences? Yes, I just didn't happen to be one of them. But Virginia talks, I think, about soul ties and things that can happen in your life when you attach yourself so deeply to something that's not a good thing. That's a very simplistic explanation. But I had this situation where my daughter, who so mourned, my daughter's biggest grief, probably my kids' deepest grief, but daughters maybe are more open about that than sons sometimes. But my daughter's deepest grief was watching me go through such pain. It brings tears to my eyes now because we want to protect our kids, right? And we do everything in life to protect our kids. And here I was being the one that brought her the greatest heartache because I just couldn't get well. And she said, Mom, we need to have some deep prayer with you. And I was just like, I was like, okay, whatever. Send anybody over. I kiddingly said, Moses over with the serpent stick. Send anybody. I don't care. I was open to anything, right? So these two women came over from the prayer team at church who believed that they had, a joy in seeing people get through the pain, and prayer could be helpful to that. It wasn't anything weird, or I thought, oh, they're pretty normal. So they came in and they asked me to repeat my husband's name and my ex-husband's name to break this to break this soul tie with this person. And so I said, okay, I'll do whatever. And she goes, well, repeat after me. There was like this poem. And again, it wasn't like they lit candles and had incense and had weird like swaying going on in the background. It was just like a normal, okay, here's a cup of coffee. And I made some of my aunt's date nut bread. You want some? And let's sit down and talk about why I'm screwed up. And so they asked me to repeat this prayer. And as part of this prayer, it was like, and now say that you want to break the soul tie between you, and then say your husband's name. Okay, I can do that. I got to his name and I went mute. It completely reminded me of Zechariah, when he told the angel, I'm not going to call my baby boy John. For you that don't know that, it's kind of a fun story in that Zechariah and Elizabeth, who were super old, had this child, and it ended up to be John the Baptist. And the angel said, you got to name the child John. We don't really know, but you got to name the child John. And that wasn't what you did in the Hebrew faith. You named him after a father. And so they said, no, his name's got to be Zechariah, all the people in the neighborhood. And he goes, no, the name is going to be John, is what the mom said. And then Zechariah went mute. He couldn't speak as a result of his lack of faith. So instantly that childhood Sunday school story came back to me. I can't say the name. I don't have enough faith, is what I told the woman, because we tried 3 times and the name wouldn't come out. It was like the weirdest thing. And nothing like that has ever happened to me. I want to tell you.
I've experienced that with people. They can't speak.
It was the weirdest. I wish. Yeah, it was just, maybe there was a reason it wasn't supposed to be videoed, but it would be interesting to see it. I was flummoxed. I was stymied. I looked at this person and I said, I cannot say the name. I guess I don't have enough faith. And to me, that was the spiritual world interjecting itself into an earthly space. That's right? So the battle is right through prayer in our intercession with God that will break that. And she said the most genius thing. I don't know if she'd ever said it before, but it really resonated with me in that moment because I was so trusting of my dear friends who loved me so deeply. And I had realized that this woman was a very intentional, very kind person. She wasn't a weirdo. She really wanted the best for me. And she said, then you can borrow some of mine. And I said, I mean, I can borrow your faith, like a cup of sugar or, like some chairs for the barbecue Saturday night. I mean, I can borrow your faith. Okay, well, and then that takes me back to the friends who took the paralytic to the feet of Jesus by cutting a hole in the roof. And Jesus saying, the faith of your friends has made you well. And so all of these at once flooded back. My Sunday school lessons from long ago, both, oh yeah, the faith of the friends. And she said I could borrow her faith. And okay, I put the two together. She prayed for me to be able to tap into the faith that she had. And I said, okay, let me try it again. And that time I was able to flawlessly repeat the name. And it was like a load of bricks had been taken out of a backpack I was carrying. So that was one of those moments where, again, the spiritual world sometimes interjects itself into our daily experiences and made a world of difference in my life from that point forward. It was like a lifting. And then I had another experience like that, which we can talk to in a minute, which has to deal with forgiveness and not harboring bitterness. When you think about the heavenly realm, right, is that none of those dimensions will be in place. It will all be unlimited. And so why can't that happen? I do believe that's what Jesus was talking about. And we said, hey, the kingdom of heaven is in our midst. That moment in that little living room, in that little house on Wilson Street, in my living room, that moment, it was just that. It was the kingdom of heaven on earth in that moment. And I believe if you ask God for those things, he will provide. It may not always be in some weirdo, supernatural, crazy way, but I think the deeper my grief, the more I needed those moments to unlock the secrets that Henry Nouwen talks about when he talks about the secrets of life are hidden in the things that hurt the most.
True religion confronts earth with heaven and brings eternity to bear upon time.
Oh my gosh, that is
Tozer.
That should be like inscribed on something. That's amazing. The fact that you had that recall. But see, we're all sometimes, I shouldn't say we are.
But that's how it happens. That's how
Yes.
we intersect and collaborate with the spiritual realm.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. And more often than not, I want everyone listening to think of, even if you're not a believer, it's okay, that there are voices that are continuously informing you. And you need to ask yourself, are those voices expanding my life or diminishing it?
Right. And I think yes. I think you develop a sensitivity. It's like when I talk about my synapses being frayed and how they were just on fire at all times because of the grief and because of the great sadness in my life and the loss and disappointment of my life and the difficulty of my life with a complete financial collapse made my life very, very difficult in ways that I hadn't experienced for a long time. When you're experiencing that kind of neurological pain, if you're good about getting through the processing of it, it will remain in the form of a sensitivity to others. That's where heaven intrudes upon earth, which Tozer was talking about.
Can you repeat that? That was profound.
Well,
and I missed it.
I think when you're going through great neurological distress, like I was going through, I felt like my synapses were all like firing at top speed, but they weren't connecting. And so it was just this electrical sparking that was going on in my body, creating all kinds of havoc, which caused a great physical deterioration and great difficulty in my life. But when you go through that, if you're willing to process the grief and face what you're going through in your own time, because no one can tell you how long this is going to take. Everybody's different. When you are willing to do that and process it that way, I think that what you're left with is a huge sensitivity to other people's pain. That's the reward, I think, is that now you can see pain in others before they have to even say anything. I can't tell you the number of times I've been in a room with a stranger. I think I talked about this. I was in the Paris airport and my sisters they're both in the travel business. And so it's great to go on vacation with everything because I just follow them along like the little sister. And we were in the Paris airport. My sister had a broken foot. So they took us to a little room on a little cart. And shortly thereafter, a woman came in and she was in great distress and she was only speaking French. And she sat down, and I just felt led to go over and say something to her, and I asked the agent, I said, can you translate for me? Can you tell her, is there anything that I can do for her? And she looked at me in broken English and said, I know what you just said. And she just broke down in tears in my arms. We just had this exchange. Here we were. We didn't speak the same language, but my heart was so touched by her heart. And I knew she was encouraged by that reaching out. I don't know what her distress was. But you'll find yourself in situations like that because of your own grief, because of what you've gone through. And to me, it's holy ground. One of the chapters toward
Wow.
the end of my book, you talk about the end of my book. One of the chapters was I was sitting in an Easter sunrise service. I'm careful with this story because it's not mine alone, but I was there with my son and his wife, and there were, I don't know, maybe 1,000 people. There were hundreds of people in this amphitheater, and there were multiple services going on throughout Southern California. It wasn't a sunrise service. It was an outside service on Easter. So I sat down, and I quickly realized that the woman sitting behind me was one of the women in my marriage that had caused me some great grief and was a very difficult time. And I just thought, I don't know, God, why you seated me here. Of all the services in Southern California, of all the seats I could sit in this amphitheater, of all the people that you could likewise bring here and put in that seat, you put her behind me. And I said, no, I'm not strong enough. I can't do this. And then the pastor that day was a unique selection by my church because he really was more of a teacher than a preacher. And lots of times, they'll put on a preacher, a real sort of out there, more enthusiastic speaker. And this pastor was fabulous in his teaching and a little bit more quiet. And that Easter sunrise service preached a sermon I'd never heard really at a Easter. And that was that we need to love our enemies and we need to pray that they will be blessed.
Wow.
Man, that started, and I said, no, God, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. You can't ask this of me. I'm not that person. I'm not well enough yet to do this. And I had this conversation in my head the whole time. You talk about, interventions of the supernatural levels. It was a constant conversation, a battle. And by the time the service was finished, I just acquiesced and I said, okay, God, but I got nothing. So I'm going to turn around and I'm going to open my mouth and you're going to put the words in, which is what I did. I turned around and the look on her face was absolute. She was stricken with just horror. I think she had absolutely no idea what I was going to say. And I don't remember the exact words, but my arms I literally opened my mouth and my arms went forward. I took her into my arms and I said, I hope your wounds have been sealed or healed or bound up, I think is what I said, which is the other thing. I had the second conversation in my mind going, who talks like this? Where are these words coming from? And I offered her a blessing and I offered her my forgiveness and turned around. I tell you the truth. I heard gonging of bells, like there were big things clanging on the cement. And I looked around and I thought, what is this? Is this some sort of crescendo to end the service? And I looked around and it became apparent to me that no one else heard it except me. There was no doubt about
I've
it.
experienced that. I confirm.
Yeah. It was the wildest thing ever. I never saw the person again. She did actually reach out in a private message and thanked me and said a lot of other very personal private things that are her story to tell. But it was a freeing that day. And literally I felt like I was floating out of the amphitheater with all of this gonging going on. And it was a true gift to me because my prayer had always been through all the loss, disappointment, and heartache, from my marriage to the financial decline, to friends that had disappeared, all of that. I never wanted to hold on to any bitterness. And I said, God, cleanse my heart. And if bitterness and lack of forgiveness is part of your grief, it's not going to leave. You got to deal with it. And I don't think you need a face-to-face thing. It's God presented that to me because I'm a little hard-headed, I suppose, or maybe dramatic and liked that kind of thing, or was looking for that thin space moment. But unforgiveness and bitterness will keep you hostage. And it doesn't necessarily mean the other person is also going to have that same moment, but that's their responsibility, not yours. Your responsibility is to cleanse your soul, to cleanse your heart. That's part of getting that spiritual alignment in order that Virginia talks about with rest, with the restoration of the emotional and the spiritual and the truths that you need to face in your life. That's one of them. So that was a
Voices are
life-changing
real.
moment. Yeah, that was a life-changing moment. So I listened to the voices when I know that, my heart is right and I'm not going under my own power, but I try to act on them. And that's, again, that neurological result of the synapsing, the crazy synapsing, the aberrant synapsing, the pathological synapsing that happens with disease, that can transform into a sympathy, into an empathy, into acting in a spiritual sense in ways that you never thought you could.
Wow. Those are powerful words to close on.
Well, my wish is for all to experience rest like yours is. That's your vision of a lifetime, Virginia, to let the chaos face it, to get it ordered, and to create a new narrative, because that's what will propel us into our future by rewriting our story.
That's it. That's the path to healing. Thank you so much,
Absolutely.
Carole.
You bet. Always fun to be with you, friend.
We hope listening to this episode has brought you closer to experiencing the freedom of wholeness and healing. If you have questions or comments about today's episode, or for updates about rest, please visit our Instagram or Facebook at The Place of Rest. If you would like more information about Virginia, or to support and join the cause of rest, please go to theplaceofrest.com/donate or call 949-289-5935. Thank you for listening to Rest with Virginia Dixon. We'll see you next week.